Hi everyone. I'm just gonna do a Marco Rubio really quickly. Yeah, that wasn't that funny. Okay, so I'm Dhruv. I'm really excited and nervous to be talking at Radical Networks with you guys tonight. I think the first time I was at Radical Networks was 2 years ago when it was at Poly, and I came here kind of feeling like a big networks poser, and I over the course of the 2 years, I've met a bunch of people who have helped me with my work, and now I'm here able to present something. So that's really cool. So thanks to Sarah and Amelia for always putting this together, and Erica, of course. So who am I? I'm a technology dilettante who thinks a lot about politics, and in that spirit, I think a lot of my work ends up looking like activism. I'm also quite a neurotic person, so that predisposition combined with some technical abilities means that I'm pretty good at focusing on topics and investigating things. So in that sense, I'm a bit like a border collie. But I also often feel this profound sense of duty that more often than not makes my life more difficult than it needs to be. So I'm also sort of like a German shepherd. So what I'm going to do tonight is I want to talk about two projects. One that demonstrates these neurotic tendencies, and another one that's maybe indicative of some misplaced duty. So the first project, I swear they're not all going to be dog photos. I'll switch to something substantive at some point. But this first project is about censorship of satellite imagery. A colleague, Brendan Byrne, and I have been working for the past few months on this, and it's pretty dear to my heart. I kind of wanted to take this time and talk about it. And the second project is called the Othernet, and that's probably what, if you read the description on the panel, that's probably what you saw. But the Othernet began as this experiment about networks, and it ended kind of with a parable about responsibility of a network operator. And I think that's something we don't really talk enough about at network conferences, the responsibility a network operator actually has to the network. So so that's where we're going with this. So to begin, the first project I wanted to talk about started with this simple question. Does Google Earth censor satellite imagery in the continental United States? This is a question I asked myself a few months ago and has led me down a deep rabbit hole, which hasn't really concluded in any real output, but it's answered a few questions. So what I love about the question is that it's immediately pregnant with lots of baby questions. Where does Google even get its satellite imagery from? What are all the imaging satellites that we know about? And how are map tiles updated? Who owns and operates these commercial satellite imagery providers? And these questions, once they're answered, spin deeper questions like, what's the NGA? Who are the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office? And what's their relationship to a company called Digital Globe? What's shutter control? So I kind of want to lead you through my process of discovery and show you some weird experiments I did to answer some of these questions, and to eventually emerge with, I guess, a newer set of questions about the role of capitalism in public-private military cooperation. And more importantly, I kind of want to talk about the mundanity of censorship and how terrifying that is. So before I begin, I'm going to do an off-the-cuff kind of Google Earth demonstration. I know we're all probably familiar with this program, but I want to point out a few things that make this investigation a little bit, make more sense. So let me see if that's possible. Maybe. Yeah. So you guys can see this, right? Yeah, of course. So Google Earth combines satellite imagery from multiple providers to build a complete articulation of what the Earth is like at different altitudes. And at the bottom of the screen, I'll try to move my guy over it here. You can see all the different providers that Google leases images from to form this image. And as you zoom in, which I'll do, Google will make a calculation as to which imagery to show you. And right now we're looking at Landsat. And that's because it's the best resolution for the altitude we're at. And if you zoom in even more, right, you sometimes, you'll switch to private, I guess, commercial satellite imagery operators like Digital Globe. And that's the company I want to spend some time talking a bit about. And the other thing I want to do for context here is just show you that in the United States, I'm just going to zoom into a random spot, right? There's no image attribution here, and that's because Google had permission to fly airplanes or balloons or blimps or whatever they're doing to get this type of imagery. And that's important because you would assume that places like Vandenberg Air Force Base or the Aberdeen Proving Grounds wouldn't allow someone to fly over there to take images, but in fact they did in pretty much all of the United States, except for one notable exception, and that's what we're going to talk about as well. So first, let me show you this experiment. I assumed that because there's a multitude of imagery providers, something that looked like censorship might occur if you tried to analyze the tile updates over the years. That meaning there would eventually be a spot or some certain spots in the continental United States that hadn't received updates and defaulted to lower resolution imagery. So let me show you this little experiment, right? So I started drawing tiles, just black squares, or colorful squares, I guess, over all the places in which there were imagery updates. So in 2016, this part of the United States and some of Mexico were updated in Google. 2015, another layer, right? So hopefully, yeah. So these areas were updated. So I'm going to just kind of speed through this because I think you get the idea. This is tough. 2014. 13. So what you see here is like almost full coverage of the United States. So that meaning that like over the last 4 years there's been recent updates here. But there's an exception. So I'm just going to speed through this and get to that exception. Right, it looks like the map is pretty full here. There's been updates. And ignore some of that stuff in Mexico because I didn't actually have good data for that. I'm focusing specifically on the continental United States. 2009, 2008. All right, you get the idea. It's like totally full of image updates, but there's one spot, one little motherfucking spot, this guy. What is that? The first interesting thing about it, right, is that it's digital globe imagery. So so Google didn't have permission to fly an airplane over this area, but they did in other particularly sensitive spots. So I kind of want to focus on this spot and then focus on digital globe. So this next experiment I did here was I pulled in, bless you, someone just sneezed? I think someone sneezed. I'm like not good on stages, so this is, any little sound kind of distracts me here. So the first thing I wanted to do, right, was I wanted to see if the government actually provided Google with any information, or if it was possible that the public could get any information from the government about this area. And it turns out that you really can't. I pulled in all of the imagery from the NAPE Department of Agriculture satellite imagery of the area, and it turns out there's a huge blank spot on this map. They didn't, this area is not covered. But what they did do, strangely enough, is hopefully this loads, because there's lots of images here, but when it does load, you'll see there's this redaction. They've actually drawn a black line over part of it. So this area is clearly a sensitive space. So what exactly is going on here? So this area is called the Nellis Complex. It's actually pretty famous, right? I'm sure lots of us actually know about the Nellis Complex and what has occurred there over the course of 60, 70 years, or actually what continues to go on there. But the Nellis Complex is essentially a military tech playground in Nevada. It's operated by the DOE, the Department of Energy, and the Air Force. And the site is filled with plenty of different classified military sites. So let's like fly around and see what's up, see what's going on there. Let me find my mouse. My mouse is right there, but something's a little frozen. Give me a second. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, so I'm just going to do one of these like unplugs and plug it back in, those sorts of things. Yo, holler if you see the mouse. Just yell it. Just tell me, like, point at the mouse. Yeah, it's been redacted. No one wants you to see this. Okay, hold on a second. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Oh, wait. Yeah, maybe. All right, cool. Back in business. So, yeah, this is oh, man. This is the Nellis complex, and my mouse is here now. Cool. So yeah, this is the Nellis complex. Let's just fly around it. I'm going to go pretty quickly. So this is the Desert Rock airstrip in the 50s to the 90s. This is where we kind of flew our rockets to, or flew planes to drop nuclear weapons on parts of this land for atmospheric testing. And you can see the legacy of those tests in the north. It's totally bombed out. You can see lots of craters. It's a sort of a stunning image, and this area is, I don't know, it's very interesting to me just to look at as a thing in history. In the south, there's the Creech Air Force Base. This is where essentially our drone pilot operators live and do our bidding overseas with satellite uplinks. Interestingly enough, I'm going to go here. There's a Subway restaurant in that facility, which has one review of 3 stars. So you could actually go and review this if you wanted to. But I don't think anyone can get to the site, so I don't actually know how that works. And the last, so now we're getting closer to the area that had the redacted image. Flying around. Right, this is the Tonopah Test Range Airport. It's semi-public in that you can watch on flight radar planes coming in and out. And if you have an SDR, software-defined radio, of course you could, listen, you can eavesdrop on the transponder signals. And this is work that Trevor Paglen had done in 2006, tracking this Janus fleet of aircraft. So then that leads us to the actual area in which where that tile is. And this is the spot that has been updated. It's sort of unremarkable, and I haven't been able to find any historic tests that have occurred there. So back to the slideshow. If we can find the mouse again, yeah. So now we arrive at some kind of a boring part of my talk. It's going to be kind of policy heavy. So clearly the government won't allow won't provide imagery of this area to Google, but Digital Globe, a private company, will. But the catch is that there's no imagery between 2007 and 2016. So the question here is, who is Digital Globe? Digital Globe is a private corporation which sells satellite imagery to the public. In fact, the plurality of the map tiles on Google Earth in the continental United States come from Digital Globe. This history dates back to, the history of the industry dates back to the 1992 Land Remote Sensing Policy Act. In layman's terms, the act essentially established that the government could begin to outsource some of our in-house intelligence capabilities to American satellite imagery companies. Digital Globe became the largest player in the satellite imagery game by eating up and subsuming 4 or 5 smaller companies, all funded by the Department of Homeland Security. And because they had this relationship with the government, they started winning all sorts of government contracts. So the government became a major customer of Digital Globe, accounting for like 60% of their sales. This is a response to a FOIA request sent by Brendan and myself about one of those contracts. So each of the Digital Globe satellites in their constellation of satellites received at least $500 million apiece invested by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So by being a large stakeholder in the success of Digital Globe, the government is able to actually exert a measure of control over them. And this is admitted in papers like this. This is a paper I found from the Joint Military Operations Department that basically said we need to continue to invest in companies like Digital Globe to maintain this control. So this is sort of boring and bureaucratic stuff, but it's important to talk about. There's already government control built into the very relationship of Google with Digital Globe. So if Google Earth affords the public with its best understanding of the world as a whole, it's important that we understand the actual relationship between the two. So let me give you an example. 4 times a year, we launch a Minuteman III rocket over a small island in the Pacific. We essentially lease this land from the Federated States of Micronesia so that we can we can launch a missile and blow it up, essentially. This island does not exist on Google Earth. Shen923 posted, can't see nothing due to the slow res, but this is the location of the Reagan test site run by the US Army in the Marshall Islands. This is the launch site that will launch the kill missile for the, there's some grammatical errors here. But you get the idea. It's like there's not really any imagery of this island. So let's step back again to this question of censorship. The success of Digital Globe financially relies heavily on the government, but what's the actual mechanism of censorship? In order to protect national security, the government includes a clause in every contract with Digital Globe that basically says that they have the ability to restrict DigiGlobe operations for reasons of national security. The policy is called shutter control. And here you can see it confirmed in SEC filings for Digital Globe. The stuff is all public on the internet. So I went out and I spoke to a representative from Digital Globe named Brock, and he assured me that shutter control had never in fact been used. And I actually believe him, because the policy of shutter control is super bureaucratic and really inefficient. Basically what happens is the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State have to issue a shutter control order, and then the Secretary of Commerce implements it. This means that all this interagency bullshit is going to occur. Paperwork has to be filed, and people need to show up to meetings. So this must be a nightmare for a DoD who wants to actually redact images. Instead, what the Department of Defense seems to do is use licensing agreements to censor images. Basically, they call on the National Imaging and Mapping Agency to purchase exclusive rights to all images it wants to keep out of the public satellite imagery marketplace. This happened in 2002 in Afghanistan. After a massive suicide bombing, journalists and researchers looking into satellite imagery to understand the war zone found that there was actually no commercially available images for them. So I want to wrap up talking about this project, but I want to make like a take-home point and then describe the actual output of the thing I'm working on. Censorship in this context is really, really boring. It happens at this abstract layer with contracts and property ownership. And when we think about censorship, we think about books being burned and journalists being jailed, and this just isn't the case, right? What we have with Google and Digital Globe is censorship with some extra steps. It's the commercial language of contracts and licenses that obfuscate the simple fact that our government is executing executive privilege to deny the public of satellite imagery. So what can we really do about this? The idea that Brendan and I had is that Digital Globe is a company just like any other. As such, I'm a customer, just like the US government. So we're in the process of speaking to Digital Globe representatives about tasking one of their satellites to take a photo of the Tonopah test range so that not only can we update that tile in Google Earth, but we can purchase exclusive rights to it. And once we do so, we can license this photo to Google for $1. The idea is that we could be the custodians of certain satellite imagery that in the future might get purchased up. But also it means that we understand the chain of custody of satellite imagery enough to turn an image on Google Earth like this, right, to something like this. So Obviously, this is an unfinished story. We're looking for support in any ways because obviously tasking a satellite is expensive, but actually it's not as expensive as you might think. So if you're interested later, we can talk about this. But now I'm going to kind of transition really inelegantly to the project I'm supposed to be talking about. And it's called the Othernet. So for a little bit of background on this whole project, I think it's important to say a bit about Saycell. Edwin's here. Edwin's the founder of Saycell. He's raised his little hand. Saycell is an open source community cell phone network that operates in the autonomous region of Nicaragua. I'm currently a network operator on this project. I'm not going to get into the technology involved because we spoke last year about this at Radical Networks, but the basic design here is that we mount robust software-defined radios on top of towers in Nicaragua and use open source software to administer the network. Of course, we're deeply indebted to the folks at Rhizomatica who have been doing something similar for years in communities around Oaxaca and Mexico. But I think I might, yeah. But there's a point that I want to emphasize early on. I used to think that networks were exclusively the domain of computer scientists, that like a dilettante like me couldn't actually participate and make one. And we certainly owe those computer scientists a lot, right? People like John Postal, who invented DNS, and the many others that Jolly McPhee pointed out earlier today. But in my mind, there's also this layer of technical jargon that serves to protect technocrats from activists and artists who can now actually just begin to build these things by simply copying and pasting config files. So I didn't need to read the IEEE standards manual about DNS to know that I could probably fuck one up for my project. The reason I talk about this here and now is to point out that we need to move past this sense of network imposter syndrome. Because as creative people interested in networks, we bring something fundamentally different to the table than computer scientists. So we can allow ourselves to actually think big because many of the technical problems we face have already been solved. So this is part of the reason why I actually like Saycell so much. Edwin's just a guy with a degree in film who was living in Bluefields and was pissed off about the cost of his cellular service and literally just thought to himself, all right, I'm just going to build my own, build his own cell phone network. So this optimism and naivety is super inspiring, right? At Saycell, we don't know what we're doing at all. And yet we've successfully been able to provide cellular service to hundreds of people who otherwise really had no option. Of course, the catch is that once the tech is solved, as network operators, we're left with a much more difficult problem. And that's the logistics, the humans, and the responsibility of being a network operator. And that's kind of how I want to introduce this project, the Othernet. So to me, the Othernet is not so much as a concrete networked thing, but rather it's a set of strategies and stories that I've accumulated while being a sort of a network operator. So as such, this is going to be sort of personal, and I think that's important. When we talk about networks, we too often focus on the technology. We talk about the fiber and the protocols, we talk about distributed nodes and mesh and blockchain, and this stuff is super important and invaluable, but what's missing from the larger conversation here is responsibility. Like, how do we follow through on actually building and articulating our better version of the internet? So these short-term ad hoc networks are excellent gestures to protest corporate consolidation of infrastructure. But what happens next? We don't maintain these things long enough for our discontent to actually blossom into a real vision. So that's because it's really hard, obviously. And that was the initial idea of the Othernet. I wanted to imagine a possibility of a world of multiple non-corporate internets that lived alongside the monolithic internet with a capital I that we use every day. So the vision was big, right? It's a world of little internets, each reflective of the neighborhood in which the network lived. I wanted these things to be visitable by foot, and I wanted to be able to walk to another internet, essentially. I wanted to be able to browse it like a tourist, but also participate as a neighbor might. So my role then was to build a single Othernet island to prove that this model could actually exist. I wanted to experiment with the types of communication that might emerge in a large local area network that was fully offline. So that's where I started. The Othernet, in terms of output, is just a large local area network on my block in Bed-Stuy. Its technology follows in the tradition of the work of Sarah Grant's subnodes or Dan Pfeiffer's Occupy Here, NYC Mesh's work, obviously, and Jonathan was like a huge help to me at the beginning of this project. And of course, New America's portable network kits. So technically, this project really isn't that unique. Even the name was accidentally lifted from Danya, who's led a workshop in Berlin of the same name. So within this network, requests to web pages are actually routed to an internal application server that lives in my bathroom. The application currently allows users to build web pages and submit PDFs to be shared with the neighborhood. This application server also does some DNS magic that allows content to live at any URL the neighbor chooses. So you can imagine being on my block and finding things like firesafety.bedstuy, jessicaspoetry.jessica, corner.deli, and facebook.xxx. So to accomplish this, I began by attending community board meetings to gauge interest. Ideally, I wanted to get a community board letter of support. The idea here was that if these islands were to run autonomously, I needed to leverage the human networks that already existed in that community. Those are the block associations, the community boards, and the gardens. Through handing out flyers at board meetings, I was introduced to the various chairs of subcommittees and eventually to the president of my neighborhood association, whose name is Kevin Anthony. Around that time, I had a prototype running in my apartment that looked like this. So I brought him over to check it out. I mean, it's chaos, but like it worked. That's a Ubiquiti router connected to this gigantic server that I got on eBay for $100 and had to clean all the hair out of and do some stuff too. But like the point is that there was a prototype that he was able to see a vision with. Let's see if this goes next. So luckily, Mr. Anthony helped me find some roofs and some fire escapes that I can install these little antennas on. So I started with 3 nanostations on Monroe Street between Bedford and Monroe. I'm sorry, on Monroe Street between Bedford and Nostrand. This initial prototype created an Othernet of this size. So if you happen to be in Bed-Stuy, what you could do is pull out your device and search for the access point. And once you locate it, you can open up your browser. Somewhere, yeah. When you open the browser, the Othernet will automatically redirect you to its internal search engine. The search engine works by crawling Othernet content for keywords and phrases and internally categorizing them for simple querying. To create content, you actually have to log in. This ensures that your page is only editable by you. You don't need to use a name, a real name or a real email address or anything like that. So to create a page by uploading a file, so you can create a page by uploading a file or by using this custom page builder. On the top left, you can see the process for uploading a PDF, and on the bottom right, you can see the web page builder. Essentially, all you need to do is fill out a form, choose a URL, and you've made a page for this Othernet. So I want to show you some of the content that was actually created here. So here is www.soulcollections.sewing shop. It's a site for an alteration store nearby that has open equipment hours for neighbors. This is www.naturalgourmet.deli. This is a website for a deli that Omar, a teenager who works behind the counter, made. On the Othernet, there are currently 100 books that I grabbed from the NYU library while I had access as well. So there's some content there that people can read. This is www.wormhole.worm. It's a site where my roommate Tristan uploads his video art. And this is www.advancedtrack.jobs, a site I put together with the community board about a sustainability program. This is an anarchist zine submitted by someone. And as you can see, basically, the constellation of web pages here are pretty diverse. Some are funny, some are serious, most are just bizarre, and those are probably the ones created by friends who were interested in the project. Currently, this is the only real, complete application on the Othernet. And the sad truth is that after this the initial hype of this project kind of died down, its usage came to a slow trickle. And what's worse is that the project actually became a really big drag to me. And that's sort of why I even started with another project, right? I'm sick of talking about this thing. And it's because I didn't necessarily appreciate that the hardest part of having a network is the maintenance and dealing with humans. So let me give you two stories that kind of solidify some of this. Last year, our block fought really hard to get the city to provide tree guards to deter dogs from urinating on our flowers. As you can see, this dog, Taco, has really long legs, so the tree guards aren't really a match for him. After a heated conversation at a meeting, a neighbor asked me about building a platform where people could take photos of Taco peeing on plants. The idea was that this way we could be able to approach her owner with concrete proof that Taco was the culprit. Another time, Mr. M, a botanist on the block, approached the whole neighborhood association distraught about something. He spends 10 minutes usually at every meeting telling us about how to remove Japanese knotweed from our yards, but this time Mr. M was upset because someone had stolen all of his flowers. By the end of the meeting, he convinced a small coalition of people that the Monroe Street Othernet needed a network of IP cameras to protect our stoops from intruders. I can't really oblige requests like this in good conscience, right? There are people with drug problems who hang out in our block. And I certainly don't want the Othernet to be this inadvertent surveillance machine that the NYPD might use to brutalize people with addiction problems. But these situations make me think a lot. Am I the custodian to this network, or am I just another node in its puzzle? And what's my responsibility? How late do I have to actually answer calls about network uptime? And how many times do I have to remind someone that their router needs to be plugged in? I've often dreamed about quitting this project, but my buddy Andy once told me something wise. He said, you have to think about a community networks project like you're adopting a dog. You have to take care of it, and you can't really ever abandon it. So that's where I'm at, right? What's next for this Othernet? So right now we're thinking about building things like streaming audio so that neighbors can have their own podcasts. We're also building things like chat and emergency applications, because obviously that's of immediate use when the wide area network is down. So this is a real screenshot from a prototyped open source SIP app. Nico, who spoke yesterday, is one of the brilliant people who are helping us develop this project. And of course, we're doing this with SaySo. And we're also thinking about building web apps to facilitate parking, right? So really practical concerns that people might actually begin to use this Othernet for something other than hosting strange websites. But the true thing I'm actually trying to build into the Othernet is an exit strategy. I need to be able to build a stable network so that someday soon I can give the keys to somebody else. So that's kind of where I want to end this. I don't know if I have time to take questions, but yeah. Thank you.
Chuck, any questions? Yep.
So there's no access point from outside to your net. Did I understand this right?
Yeah, that's right. You have to walk to the Othernet, be in reach of the signal, and connect to it. But ideally, right, this is a smaller piece of a larger puzzle where there's many Othernets that maybe could be connected through point-to-point antennas or something like that, and then this is a network of islands that are offline.
All right, in the back.
Thanks for the great talk. I'm really interested in some of the stuff you're saying about your choice to involve the community boards. You could have just set it up on your roof and found some other people's roofs. I guess in particular, I was just wondering maybe if you had some anecdotes you could share about debates that were happening in those meetings, and in particular, how did you manage to articulate the value of this, or how was the value of this discussed? What's some of the language that was used there? In particular, piggybacking back on this question about the fact that it wasn't connected. So how did people talk about the value given that it wasn't connected to the internet?
That's an awesome question. So So when I first approached the community board, it helped that I had a prototype that I could show people, right? I could walk over and be like, hey, connect to this thing out of my window, and you can see what it is that I'm talking about, right? Because these aren't necessarily, like, not everyone on the block is tech literate. But the question quickly became obviously like, okay, how could this ever be more helpful than the internet itself? And there's two answers that I have now, and they're both not really good ones. The first is that I think right now with the Othernet, what's been really helpful is that we're building a network as a community building exercise essentially at this point. And it's not something that I anticipated with this project, but that is like we're all working sort of together to think about nice ideas that could work, like this Monroe Street parking app or like this offline calling. The other thing that Kevin Anthony brought up, which is really good, and I think about it a lot, especially now that I'm working with this project. I'll be working on this project for another year. Is that his eyes really lit up when we talked about it because he saw it as a way to kind of co-opt the money of civic tech and bring it to a community that actually needed more help. Like if we want, like we need another day of trash collection on our block. And what this Othernet really immediately is useful for is like getting the attention of these civic tech civic tech folks who now want to help us do this. So we have this attention and we have some like funds flowing in. So that's kind of like the immediate use, right? Sort of co-opting that language. But that's not really a good answer to your question.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Dhruv.